we are in recruiting season, we do have some of our potential applicants joining us as well. And so welcome to those folks to this social medicine round space. And I'm going to go ahead and get us started in just another minute and just let a couple of additional folks join. Okay. Hey everyone. So welcome, and thank you all for joining. I am Stella Sappho. I'm going to be moderating this discussion today. This is our November social medicine rounds. We have them every month, and we are very lucky to have a series of nationally renowned speakers talking to us about different issues that range from reproductive rights to how we're addressing the opioid overdose crisis to issues around criminal justice system, et cetera, et cetera. As you're listening as attendees, if there's topics that are of interest to you that you would like us to focus on down the line, please let us know. We'd be happy to really consider those. For the residents that are on who are signed on as Monty residents, please do change your name just so we have a sense of who's in the virtual room with us. I am extremely excited about our speakers today. We have Ms. Leah Goodridge and we have Ms. Nancy Parker, and I'm going to be sharing their bios for you. So I can't do both at once. I'm going to come off of my screen and I'm going to go ahead and share with you their background and their bios. Both are pretty esteemed in the work that they do in their own right. So Ms. Leah Goodridge is a nationally renowned movement lawyer, thought leader, and writer with over a decade of experience in housing rights and racial justice. She serves as the managing attorney for housing policy at Mobilization for Justice, where she leads a team of attorneys who provide tenants with legal representation in eviction court proceedings. She was formerly New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio's appointed Leah to the rent, formerly New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio appointed Leah to the Rent Guidelines Board, where she served for nearly 4 years as a tenant representative. She has honors and accolades that include the 2022 New York Bar Association Firestarter Award, the Jane Jacobs Award by the Met Council, the New York County Lawyers Association Public Service Award, and many, many others. She received her JD from the University of California at Los Angeles School of Law and her BA from Vassar College, and she lives in Brownsville, just down the street from me, Brownsville, Brooklyn. I am also so pleased to be able to invite in Ms. Nancy A. Parker, who is the Executive Director of the Detroit Justice Center, which is an abolitionist organization fighting to end mass incarceration and to create just cities. So Nancy earned her JD from Washington University in St. Louis School of Law and received her BA from the University of Michigan. At the Detroit Justice Center, Nancy has directly represented returning citizens and other marginalized communities in traffic and family court matters, and provided legal support to grassroots organizations fighting for racial justice. She served as co-counsel in a successful federal civil rights lawsuit against the Detroit Police Department and as part of the Stop Shot Spotter Detroit Coalition that has been successful in securing $7 million for Detroiters. Nancy's work in life is focused on liberating Black people, and her passion is fueled every time she looks into the eyes of her two young and beautiful daughters. And so it is my pleasure to have both speakers here today. And just as a reminder of what we'll be focusing on in our rounds discussion today. So this conversation, for those of you who are not kind of directly in medicine or who are adjacent to healthcare, this conversation really came together as we were thinking about the social determinants of health and the challenges that we have as clinicians and people in healthcare with being able to address that, and how often the things that make people ill, like lack of housing, like interactions with the criminal justice system, like poverty, like lack of access to education, et cetera, are things that feel outside of the realm of where clinicians are able to push into and to go. And our legal colleagues and legal activism and the work that's done by Mobilization for Justice and Detroit Justice Center represents another place of potential support that we can think about investing into that can improve the lives of our patients. We specifically chose the Detroit Justice Center because the statistics in Detroit are some of the harshest for individuals who identify as Black in terms of health outcomes. And that really mirrors what we see in the Bronx as well. And the advocacy and the work that's done by the Detroit Justice Center is, I would say, some of the most kind of groundbreaking in terms of thinking outside the box of what's possible. So we're going to do our usual and have both of our speakers share comments. We'll start with Ms. Leah Goodridge, and then we'll go over to Ms. Nancy Parker, and then we'll open it up to discussion throughout. Please feel free to enter any questions you might have in the chat or to hold them and raise your hand. So I will turn it over to you, Leah. Thank you so much. And we've discussed beforehand that we'll all use our first names. And so Leah, please, we'd love to hear your comments on the work that you do. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. Congratulations to all of you for getting at this point in your careers. So I have been a housing rights attorney for the last 11 years. And what my work entails is I started out as a staff attorney. And so I actually represented people who were facing eviction. So that means that on a day-to-day basis, 9 to 5 every day, I was in housing court, literally representing tenants who were in eviction proceedings. Those cases could be, the bulk of them were non-payment of rent. By the way, now is a good time to say that the median Manhattan rent right now is $5,000. So a lot of times when I get in these discussions, they're like, why aren't people paying the rent? I'm like, can you afford $5,000 for a 1-bedroom? Okay, then. So this is where I come in because New York has gotten so unaffordable. A lot of people are getting evicted. And the reality is that if you have an apartment right now, and you try to find a lower priced apartment, it's going to be very difficult for you to do that. So that's where tenants' rights attorneys come in. So I work at a nonprofit called Mobilization for Justice. And what that means is that we represent low-income New Yorkers who are facing eviction, who cannot afford an attorney. Our work is city funded. There is a legal initiative called the Right to Counsel, which means that people are more so familiar with in criminal proceedings when you say you have a right to a free attorney. That actually was not the case for many decades in civil cases. So if you have an eviction case, you did not necessarily have a right to a free attorney. So New York passed a law about 5 years ago saying that tenants who are low income may be eligible for a free attorney. So thus the city funds a lot of the legal services nonprofits, and thereby we hire more attorneys and we represent tenants facing eviction. What I will say, having practiced in over a decade, is that health and disability inform a lot of my work. Now, I think a lot of people may not be aware, but in eviction cases, when someone is facing eviction, it actually causes a lot of mental and physiological and physical impacts on a person's body. And so how that plays out is I will tell, I'm the person's attorney and they're facing eviction, and the eviction date is coming up and we have to run and try to, for example, some cases are about non-payment. I mentioned many of cases are not about non-payment. They're about other different things, but let's choose non-payment. I'll say, we have to go and apply for rental arrears assistance. And what tends to happen in a lot of these cases is the person, there's a point in the case where they literally freeze. If I could say to someone, you have to walk 2 blocks to go and apply for rental arrears assistance, they won't do it. They can't do it because they have just sort of frozen. And I did not particularly understand it. I don't think I would have understood it before practicing, but I have had my own experiences with this. When you are in a bind and your whole world is about to collapse, and you are facing depression, someone telling you to literally move from one part of the room to the next part of the room, it can be nearly impossible. So when you have the weight on your shoulders and you have to do something, and then someone tells you, go outside, go travel, go to this place. And by the way, many of the places are not very welcoming. When you go to the government agencies to ask for assistance, a lot of times they are, well, listen, there have been news articles about this. Sometimes people get accosted, they might get assaulted. You oftentimes have to wait for hours on end. So it's not the most welcoming experience. So there's a lot of anxiety, and rightfully so, about dealing with these experiences. And you might think, well, it's your last stand. But what happens is people feel immense emotional pressure from dealing with it. So that's a big part of some of my work. The mental health aspects I described. There's also physical health that I'll talk about a bit. How much longer do I have to talk? So
10 to 15 minutes.
Oh, okay. So, um, so I have many other ways that this comes into play in my work. One case that I think about all the time that I had many years ago is there were public housing tenants who came to me who said, we have repairs. This building has a whole bunch of repairs. They never do anything. And so we need your help as the attorney, their housing rights issues. So I started representing them. And I started filing the case, and it was a group of them, maybe about 20. And I was just so, I think the one I remember the most is there was a man, and it was actually in the New York Daily News, but there was a man and he was in his 40s and he had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis and he was using a wheelchair. And his issue was that the elevator would go out consistently and there would be literally no elevator, but he lived on the 16th floor. And he actually had an entire system with his home health aide, who, by the way, you get paid as a home health aide, but some of them are like, yeah, but I don't get paid to walk up 16 flights. So that's another thing. Some of the home health aides were like, okay, well, I'm only getting paid barely minimum wage, so I'm not going to walk up 16 flights. I'm sorry, goodbye. And so that's one way that we see the intersection of poverty, of health, of housing. And then the other was that when he would find a home health aide, they would have a system of where they would have to they would have to through his window, pull up his medication, because some of them would walk up the stairs, or he would throw down keys, or he would throw down other things. And that was such a representation of what it's like to deal with health issues, to have a disability, and then to also deal with inadequate housing and how that inadequate housing can make your health issues worse, can make it worse. So I talk about eviction, I talk about mental health, I talk about physical health. I want you to know that if you have someone coming in as a patient and they're dealing with housing issues, it could be eviction, but some of them are just, like I said, repairs. Repairs are actually a big, if they tell you I've got, mold in my apartment, or I've got no heat. I have to tell you, as a tenants' rights attorney, having heard these stories day in and day out of New Yorkers over a period of years, be gentle with them. It is extremely, almost debilitating, emotionally debilitating for people to, they're living their life, they're going to work or whatever, and then they come home, there's no heat. And then they have to fight with their landlord. They have the attorney fighting with them. But at the end of the day, where else can most people go, right? If you have a semi-affordable apartment, you're probably not going to find another one that's cheaper. So a lot of people end up being trapped into these situations. So it's something that I like to tell health advocates, whether doctors or other positions, I like to flag for them. Like, if someone tells you I'm going through this, it's something to make a note of, that it's an incredibly stressful situation. It's like as if someone were to tell you any other trauma inducing event. Because I think sometimes people hear it and they're like, oh yeah, housing issues. Like, no, it's just, as someone on the end of it who has to work with those clients, we oftentimes have to engage with social workers when we can get them, because the cases become very difficult, because the health impacts of dealing with housing issues, it's terrible, really. It takes up a lot of space, because when you cannot enjoy where you live, I've had so many cases. I had one where there was a lady who, no matter how much she cleaned, no matter how spotless her apartment is, the building had roaches. And so her apartment would just have a whole bunch of roaches. It just didn't matter what she did. And so all of the tenants in that building would beg the landlord, please, like, exterminate, pay, just nothing. And so, like, little things, like, you come home from work and you're trying to make food and you look and there's a roach, like that would just, she would call me, like, just in a panic. Bed bugs are another one. You do everything you can, you think they're gone, months later, you get a bite and it's like they're back, right? And it is even worse when a landlord doesn't do much. So, you know, it's a circular issue of where you have health issues and disability that can be worsened with eviction, and also eviction can literally cause, if you already have these issues, they can be exacerbated when you're going through housing issues. And then in addition to that, even if you don't have any health issues, eviction themselves and going through eviction can cause these issues. There are many studies that show that evictions cause depression, among many other things. Other cases that I've had that are memorable, well, all of them are memorable, but the ones that I think about years later, the public housing ones are the ones I remember the most, because those are the ones where it's like, even when I'm the lawyer, okay, I get to court and people are still like, yeah, whatever, so what, whatever, it's public housing. That is the attitude. And it's a lot of racially coded treatment, because it is also that, yeah, whatever, these are Black tenants, so like, who cares? You have to wait 60 years for repairs, even with the legal case. And so as the advocate, one of the things that I have done is, and this is why I actually write about professionalism, is I often just challenge a lot of this. And I do come out of my face oftentimes in court and challenge people, like, I'm not going to wait 60 days for repairs for my client, and challenge a lot of it, which a lot of lawyering, especially in this area, can be and maybe it is the same in health field, but just go along, get along, like, however the train runs, just follow that process. And so you have to fight for your client. You have to fight against that for your client.
Leah, and I definitely want us to come to you to talk a little bit more about, like, kind of what clinicians and healthcare workers can do. But I think that that's a really good foundation for us to have a sense of where you work, how you operate, what you see in terms of kind of lived experience of what we're dealing with the housing crisis in New York City. So I don't want to cut you off if there's nothing else to add. I'm going to turn it over to Nancy, but that is a really good foundation for us to understand the extent of the problem. And yes, I see the finger. Yes.
I just remembered the case. I remembered it was a lady who had asthma and had black mold and in public housing, and they just, that's a big thing in housing, little black mold that covered her ceiling. And we had to fight for that. But, you know, her health worsened, and, you know, okay, so I'm done. Thank you.
There's much more to be said. And so with that appetizer, Nancy, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you so much, Leah.
Thank you, Leah. Thank you, Stella. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. So I'm Nancy A. Parker, the Executive Director of the Detroit Justice Center, which we affectionately refer to as DJC. And so at DJC, we do a myriad of things that all fall under what we coin as creating a just city. So we are a nonprofit law firm. We are an abolitionist organization, as you heard. And our goal, our mission, the way we work is we work alongside community in order to transform our legal system, create economic opportunities, and promote just and equitable cities. And we do this by being movement lawyers, like you just heard Leah speak about being a movement lawyer. And so being a movement lawyer, I just want to define, is not a specific type of law. It's a way of practicing law, where we center the clients, where we put their needs first, and not us as attorneys or lawyers or law firms, But so quick example could mean taking a case to trial for a political reason rather than to get a not guilty verdict, because the evidence will show that. But what we challenge and posit is that the law itself is unjust. So at DJC, we work under a three-pronged approach, and we have three programmatic areas. And so we categorize our work as defense, offense, and dreaming. And in those three prongs of defense, offense, and dreaming, the defensive prong is our legal services and advocacy practice. And so you may think of your typical legal services aid, where we're providing pro bono legal services to the communities. We sit in Detroit, by population, the Blackest city in the country. And so our clients are majority Black folks, majority returning citizens or formerly incarcerated folks, as well as folks who are system involved, who have warrants out for their arrest. How many times has a Black person, we've seen the lynching on TV or on our cell phones, and we hear people parroting this, oh, they had a warrant, as opposed to, in a way to justify their death, right? And when I was young, I was like, oh my God, they had a warrant. They really must have done something atrocious, right? Because I don't have a warrant. The reality is many people are walking around with warrants. I have a colleague who has a law degree that had a warrant out for his arrest. In the state of Michigan, our traffic enforcement system is literally a traffic enforcement to jail pipeline and an extraction mechanism. These are not hyperboles. This is literally how it is structured in Michigan. The fines and fees that are borne off the backs of Black people, poor people, houseless people is what runs the courts. So there is an inherent conflict and an inherent incentive in order to sentence people egregiously in order to extract these fines and fees. So at DJC, in our defensive prong, we're constantly working in traffic court to fight fines and fees. We're in family court. We do child support work. We do reunification of families after folks have been incarcerated for a period of time. We also, similarly to the housing crisis in New York, we offer eviction defense services. So we're trying to keep people in their homes. We're trying to stave off these economic fines and fees that are really debilitating when you have a family of 3 or 4 and you have to make a decision. Am I going to pay this ticket, or am I going to put food on the table for my children? For you and I, we can reach in our bank account, pull out our card, whatever the case may be. You pay that ticket, you keep it moving, you don't even bat an eye. For the majority of folks in Detroit, that is not the case. They cannot pay these fines and fees, which can be something as illegal as folks don't realize having a dangling air freshener decal on your rearview mirror, or your baby boots, or your crucifix. These are all reasons that a cop can pull you over. Clearly they're pretextual, but they are a reason that you could get pulled over. So in our defensive prong, we're doing that work. We're alleviating immediate trauma for folks, as well as working on the advocacy end, because we know these are systemic issues. It is not born from an individual's personal failure. Get that out of your mind. These are systemic issues that are intentional, that are trapping people for a purpose. So that's our defensive prong. Then we switch to our offensive prong, because as abolitionists, our goal is to tear down the carceral system, is to abolish all systems of surveillance, policing, caging human beings. So we're talking about jails, prisons, surveillance technology, right? Anything that is using technology as a weapon, and it also strips the dignity and humanity of individuals. As an abolitionist, we center human beings. Our current legal system centers punishment. There is no accountability in our legal system. You will hear me often refer to it either as the legal system or the punishment system. There is no justice in what we currently have. It is not founded that way, and it is not meant to breed justice. It is meant to punish people. We literally have a death-making institution. No one in their right mind could ever say that being incarcerated can ever be anything that is positive or promotion. We know what happens in there. People's health deteriorates, people's mental health deteriorates. They see violence, sexual violence, all types of harm occurs within these walls that we jail human beings, that we have said that this person is worthy of being thrown away. And so if we go back to our defensive prong, we have been battling to end juvenile life without parole. All you medical professionals know that the brain is not fully formed until 26 years old. So tell me why we live in a society where a juvenile, a child, a minor can make a decision where we know that their brain is still forming at 16, 17, hell, 21, 22, right? And we are sentencing these juveniles to life without parole, sometimes life with the possibility of parole. But what we have said to these majority Black and brown communities is that we are going to put aside the science and we're going to convict you off of your worst mistake, off of your worst incident, as if we all don't have bad days. Human beings are not disposable. We all are redeemable. Our current system does not allow for that. Going back to the defensive prong, because there's so much defense. I love the offense, but there's so much defensive work, right? So we were in the middle of a pandemic where you have the CDC saying the way to fight against COVID is to wash your hands and drink water. Wash your hands and drink water repeatedly, right? This is what everyone is saying. And I live in a city where neighbors and communities were still getting their water shut off because of profit, because of capitalism, because of greed, because you have hyped up the prices for people to pay their water bills. They can no longer pay it. And despite the fact that people may die if they don't have access to water, you're shutting the water off. So now legal activists, organizers, we have to file lawsuits. We have water warriors that are dropping off bottled water for folks. We have people who are putting out storm barrels to catch the water when it rains so that they can flush their toilets, so that they can wash their hands. This is criminal. This is a crime, yet it is not seen as such, right? We want to talk about the folks that are stealing to live, that are literally trying to survive, where we have done nothing to address their basic needs. So then we switch to our offensive prong. And in that offensive prong, we're thinking about what is the world in which we do want to inhabit? What is the world where we want to change our relationships with one another, with human beings, with the land, with property, with medicine? We created the society that we currently live in. We created capitalism. We created trickle-down economy. We created the poverty that we're seeing at these astronomical levels. These are all man-made. Therefore, we can create a different way. And so our transactional attorneys and other non-attorneys in our offensive prong work to create a different economy. So we're talking about the solidarity economy, shared economy, where we can have folks creating worker-owned co-ops so that folks are not slaving away and have nothing left. But if you are an owner, if you have a stake in this business, you don't feel like you're being used. You want to show up for work. And at the end of the day, whatever profit is generated, we will divide it up and we'll split it and we can all take it home. With community land trust, there's a big wave. Detroit, we're slowly to catch on, but we're about to literally take this land back. Everyone shouts land back, right? In Detroit, we're going to the city who holds the majority of vacant lands and properties. And we are saying, give that land to us. Give that to the nonprofits. Give that to the communities so that they can dictate for once what is developed in their communities. So they can tell you, we need a local grocery store. We need a daycare. And that is what is developed. And so through community land trust, worker-owned cooperatives, and other economic models that we work with, again, returning citizens, formerly incarcerated folks, and just all around community members. We're trying to change and shift our relationship to economy and money. With those community land trusts, we are creating deeply affordable, permanent housing that the ground lease is 99 plus years, virtually in perpetuity. You can own your home, and there is a limit on taxes and profit that can be borne off of that land, so that you can live with your family comfortably without facing eviction, as well as you can then sell it to someone else who can live there at a reasonable price. So that is our offensive arm. And then I'll spend the majority of the time talking about our dreaming prong, which is very exciting because, again, it goes without saying, but we have to be explicit. When people hear abolition, they're like, oh my goodness, Nancy, that is ridiculous. We can't take away cops in prisons today because it's going to be the Wild Wild West. What do we do with the rapists and the murderers? That's literally the first thing I get all the time. My question is always, what are we doing about them now? What are Black people's relationship to the cops right now? You want to talk about social determinants? Black folks' interaction, the frequency and extent of interaction with police, with the carceral system, which includes our court system, that is a social determinant of health. The amount of folks that we have finally been able to secure a driver's license that have said, oh my God, I can finally breathe easy, that I don't have to look behind my shoulder as I'm driving because I'm fearful that I'll get pulled over. Can you imagine the weight of every day taking your kids to school, going to work, knowing that you don't have a valid driver's license, that if any racist cops pulls you over for any pretextual reason, that you could be put in jail? And we know for a fact, one day in jail can disrupt someone's home. You can lose your home, you can lose your kids, you can lose your livelihood, you can lose your job, right? We know all of these things. So what are we doing to build a better future? At DJC, in our dreaming prong, we know that abolition is not going to happen overnight. So me as a lawyer, I don't want the current system because I see it and it makes me sick. I know exactly what it is, and it's gross and it's disgusting. I want to be put out of a job. I'm going to say that again. I am working so that I do not have a job, because this should not be the roles of individuals. This should be the role of government writ large and communities, right? So what does it look like, Nancy, if we don't have court systems? We can go back to our roots. We can go back to circle keeping. We can go back to indigenous ways of solving conflict, of back home, tribal ways of resolving conflict, where you have elders, you have people in the community who are trained, right? And this is what we're doing in our restorative justice network. We have trained community members, elders, folks who are steeped in the community in conflict resolution, mediation, circle keeping, because we are not idealistic, we're realists, right? In my world, harm will occur because we are human beings. What I'm saying is, how do we address that harm? We can do it by centering people's dignity and humanity. So that means if we're taking restorative justice and transformative justice, this is another way that we can resolve issues by centering accountability. And it is but one alternative. For so long, for centuries, we have had a hammer in our hand. When you have a hammer, everything is going to look like a nail. And we posit, take that hammer out of your hand. Be a solutionary in the medical field, in the legal field, because as the great Audre Lorde has told us, we do not live single issue lives. Everything is interconnected. So that if I'm fighting for bail, and we see what happened in New York, but we're still also fighting to end cash bail. Hopefully it doesn't get rolled back. Hopefully we can push things through. But medical professionals, you guys should be fighting to end cash bail as well. Cash bail is a wealth detention system. If you have the money and you've committed any crime, you can walk out of these doors. If you do not have the money, we're going to hold you hostage. Meanwhile, you're not getting your medication. Any mental health issues you have is exasperated. If you had a follow-up workup that you were supposed to see your PCP for, guess what? That's not happening. If you have diabetes, if you have all of the seizures, whatever that requires constant care, they're not receiving that. So if and when their case is finally dismissed or thrown out or not guilty and they are finally released and they see you as their doctor, their health issues are way more exasperated now, right? And you're dealing with something that might have been, take this medicine preventative, and now you have a huge traumatic issue that you now have to deal with, maybe surgery, whatever, when if people were not locked up, if we were not caging human beings, we would have a better relationship. We already know the health disparities that Black folks face. And so taking into account the current legal conditions, the current just societal conditions that folks in majority Black Detroit and other pockets that have Black and brown and poor folks, these are real issues. So in the dreaming prong, we have been very successful training folks for restorative justice. We're doing a mental health ecosystem scan because we know the two main drivers of crime in this country is mental health issues, not being treated, not going undiagnosed, as well as poverty. So we as a society need to actually address these root causes as opposed to just throwing people away. And so with that, and mindful of time, and although I'm a lawyer, so you think I love talking, which I do, I hate talking at people. I love talking with people. So I hope that we can have some questions here. Thank you,
My
Stella.
goodness. Thank you so much to both Nancy and Leah. I definitely think that there is the sense of injustice that I hear in your voice, Nancy, really reflects what a lot of us see in medicine, where we see the compounding of these issues and feel really a sense of like impotence to be able to help. And so the framework that you've set up of the defensive, offensive, and then dreaming, the dreaming really struck me. And I would invite all of those who are listening, who are medical students, trainees, and others, to think about what you would do if, as a medical professional, you were able to think about dreaming. What would dreaming look like for you if you could bring that into your practice, right? Dreaming beyond just what's offered to us as medical professionals of how we behave and how we act and how we support our patients and our colleagues. What would it look like for us to be able to dream beyond that? I think that framework is exceptional. I wanted to begin by asking, invite others to share questions, but I wanted to ask both of you specifically around kind of the role of clinicians and healthcare folks in this. And Leah, you started to get at it in your comments of just like, these really poignant stories of the asthmatic, the person with, black mold, the person who's in a wheelchair who has to go up 16 flights. And I would just love for both of you to just be able to help us get really explicit with what can we do? How can we be in service of service? Is, when we hear these stories, are we reaching out to the tenants' right attorney and sharing letters? Are we showing up for hearings? Like, what does it look like for us to support this movement work from the privilege that we have as clinicians? And I'll start with Leah and then move over to Nancy.
I think the first thing is something that I work tirelessly in the field of law now, just in general in the workplace, but especially from professional schools, is to disrupt the thinking that a lot of us have been taught as like there's just this raceless, genderless client, and they start with a blank slate, and then because that's what lawyers are taught. Like, we have, you just have the client, and like, or you have a legal issue, and like you just have to, in order to like have reason and look at this, where you have to, and like it doesn't work. Because racism, systemic racism does exist. And so you do have to, like, for that reason alone, for example, a lot of social justice attorneys, even in our briefs, we don't even say, our client is Chinese American and they are the lone standing client in this building in Chinatown, and this is gentrification. We don't even say that because we're afraid of even mentioning, we're taught as lawyers that like, there's a reasonable person standard. I think the same thing also exists in medicine to some degree. Of sort of just like looking at everything from a blank slate. And unfortunately, the side effect of that is you learn to dehumanize things under the guise of being rational or, in order to be effective at your job. And I actually think that the opposite is what the effect is. So I would say the first thing is when you have a client coming in and they are, for example, low income, or they tell you have a housing issue, that whatever system you have where someone tells you like, I have this, and it's like a trigger or like something that's like, oh, let me pay more attention. This should also be part of that too. Because I think sometimes, and this is often discussed in the health field, various pinpoints of pain are minimized, especially with patients of color. And so this is a part of it too. I have an eviction case and it's like, oh, okay, yeah, you got a housing issue. And it's like, no. That should be something that's like, okay, this is a source of trauma. So so I think the first and most important part of it is recognition, acknowledgement and recognition, as opposed to the sort of like business as usual, like, okay, well, I can't put this down as a code. Like, this is not a health issue. So I'm not going to pay that much attention to it.
Yeah. So like giving it the proper amount of attention that it needs, even if it seems minor, like my heat is out.
Yeah.
It can often be indicative of something bigger.
Right. And what that can mean is like, if someone says, I haven't had heat I haven't had heat in 5 days. So then you go on with that line of questioning, like, okay, do you have you noted, whatever questioning that would be related to, just don't ignore it. Right. So if someone tells you I haven't had heat, okay, so do you have hypothermia? Have you noticed increased heart? Like literally go through like how this might impact their health. I think these things are often ignored because, and I've said it before, I'll say it again. I do think that oftentimes in these professional schools, you're just taught to look through this little prism. And so unless someone says like some magic keywords, then we don't pay attention to it. A prime example is we often ask, we had in our forms, lawyers have in our forms to ask our clients, do you have a disability? And so all of our clients would be like, no. And then I realized, like, you know what, if I ask my grandmother or someone, like, do you have a disability? They would also say no. But if I ask them, do you have diabetes? Do you have high blood pressure? Do you have, they'd be like, oh yeah. Same thing. I started asking my client, do you have any health issues? And then I would be like, such as diabetes or anything, or blah, 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 blah. Like that's an example of disability. And some of them, when I started it, they would be like, oh, I don't have a disability, but I do have like X, Y, and Z, which were disabilities. So I even think sometimes, I think it's helpful for us to understand that these are the ways that our healthcare system has inculcated in everyone's mind that measures of pain or anything, it doesn't exist for people of color. And even to that extent, a lot of people of color have also internalized it to the point of where if you ask them, even me, the other, like maybe about 3 years ago, I've had fibroids, like a lot of Black women do. And I remember I went on this like Facebook board website, and it was a diverse group, but it was not that many Black women. And people were framing it like I was diagnosed with fibroids. And I remember commenting like, you don't get diagnosed with fibroids, you just have fibroids. And I had to take a step back and be like, you know what, maybe I've internalized it. This isn't a real health issue like myself, that like, who gets diagnosed, you just live with it. And that's what a lot of my clients do. So I think it's helpful when you're a health advocate to be aware of that dynamic. So when people tell you things that are triggering, to literally treat it as such, even if the client themselves may not be fully cognizant.
Got it. Thank you, Nancy.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in there. Leah brought up a great word, trauma. So the work that we do is trauma inducing. We get vicarious secondary trauma every day by way of our clients, right? And so this isn't even my lived experience, but me just asking someone like, okay, how you doing today? Or how did you get to court okay? And it could be, yeah, but the car broke down. I had to drop the babies off at whoever. And, the father of my child beat me last night. I got this black eye. I covered it up with makeup. But yeah, I'm ready to go on this traffic ticket. I am not a social worker. I am not a doctor. And I receive all that, and we got to be like, okay, let's go to court, right? So like there's so much trauma, and I am one, as a Black woman who has trauma every day from personal things and then compounded. There needs to be a stronger defense for folks to get these mental health services, like point blank, period. My husband is a federal public defender, and so he's dealing with defending way more high level issues. And every single one of his clients, every single one of them have gone undiagnosed with mental health issues. And so when they see these mental health or doctors or whoever, your questions have to be broader. To be Black in America, as James Baldwin said, is to be in a constant state of insanity, because we see what is going on. People will denounce our lived experiences, right? Do you understand how much mental torture, emotional torture that is, to know that the life I live, others who do not are telling me that I'm making this stuff up? That will drive someone crazy. Okay. So whatever y'all questions you ask for trauma, to get someone to see a therapist or to do whatever, we need more of that in our community, because quite frankly, we're not seeing it. To answer specifically the question in the chat from Michelle, thank you so much, Michelle. So I think there's a couple things. One, asking folks whenever time you see them, asking if there are any upcoming hearings that they have scheduled. And even when I say this to health professionals, because I've been burned. Very quick anecdote, had very traumatic first pregnancy at 30 years old and was treated like crap. The MFMs suck. I hate MFMs. I know you're needed. Thank you. But bedside manners go out the window. It's like, you guys read books, you're geniuses in math, science, and biology, whatever, and you have no human decency. So learn how to talk to people who are going through traumatic situations and treat everyone with dignity and respect. But even in asking, are there any hearings or anything that will take you away from this care, whether they have follow-up, workup, or they're supposed to see another doctor or whatever, you need to ask these questions, again, in a culturally competent way of, is there something that can pull them away from this medical care that I'm giving them? Is there something that can take away from that I need to be aware of? Compassionate leaves, compassionate appeal. So depending on what stage people are, but we saw it at the height of the pandemic, and I hope that people were leaning on doctors as much as possible. I saw it firsthand in some situations. But when people are doing what's called a compassionate release motion, or asking the judge, whether it's for bail or post-sentencing, for folks to be released, one of the main reasons that the court is willing to release someone who is incarcerated is if there is a mental health issue. And a lot of times we need doctors to articulate the extent and the danger of continuing to house someone in a warehouse of bodies where the care is abysmal, right? And that this literally could cause their death. And so whether it's the bevy of comorbidities that folks have, or pre-existing conditions or whatever, folks need doctors to be advocating for their release. And yeah, I think I'll pause there.
Yeah, we heard that last month. We had some speakers come and talk to us specifically about the criminal, the legal system. And one of the things that we talked about was just the power of these letters that physicians can pen for people who are incarcerated. And so it's a reinforcement, I think, for those of us who may not be doing them as much, to think about how we can do them more, because it seems like they can have a real impact. There is a question from Terry Ann. Go ahead, Terry Ann.
Hi, Dr. Sorry, how do you say your name?
I'm Dr. Sappho, and then we have Ms. Parker and Ms. Goodridge.
And Ms. Parker and Ms. Goodridge. So I have a question. So I know, like whenever we interview patients, we ask about their, social history, like where they live, where they work, so on and so forth. So I was just this is not something that I've done before, but it's something that came to mind, asking patients if they have issues with roaches and mold. But like from personal experience and just like personal experience and like other things that I witnessed with other folks is that if they have like mold or issues with roaches, despite cleaning and exterminator coming, the fear is that if you even contact 311, then you'll be thrown out of your house and then you have to live in a shelter. So how do you reassure individuals that you won't just be thrown into a shelter, but will make sure that, the issue will be resolved somehow? How do you sort of like address
I
that?
have never had in all, yeah, so one of the things, unfortunately, when you call 311 is issue is if that's going to do anything. I've actually never had anyone who called 311 and then they got thrown into a shelter because of the repairs. Sometimes what happens is you might call 311 because of a repair, and then they come and then it ends up being a much bigger, like there's a structural issue with the building, like they do some testing and the walls are going to like come to, if like you see these condo collapses and stuff. So like the Department of Buildings, this has a lot in some cases or buildings with flooding, like the structure of the building changes. And so they issue what's called a vacate order, which means that you can't live, until there's a vacate order in place. And it doesn't mean that you'll never get to live there, but it means that the landlord has to basically fix the building, which is actually to your benefit. If you get a vacate order, that means honestly, it's not safe for you to live there. I think with housing issues, I think the main thing you should tell people is to try to get a free attorney. And I don't know, I think maybe a general question that you might ask people if you're looking for a form question might be, are you experiencing any issues with housing? Like i.e. repairs or anything, or eviction. And I think that would be a good question, so that if people answer yes, you already know they're definitely more stressed out than normal. But I haven't, you can call 311. What the process is HPD, which is the Department of Housing and Preservation. They will send vector out to your apartment if you are not NYCHA. So if you're NYCHA, they will not send the inspector. NYCHA is public housing. So if you call 311, they'll send an HPD inspector. They will look around, list all of the repairs, and send the summary of violations to your landlord. And sometimes the landlord will do something because they've issued them, a summary of violations, basically a warning. And other times the tenant has to take the landlord to court. More than not, they to take the landlord to court. I should say, if you're interested in housing, I'm on Twitter at Leah from Brooklyn, and I tweet a lot about housing. My LinkedIn, I don't really talk that much about housing. I talk more about work issues. But if you're interested in finding out more about housing and you're on Twitter, then you should follow me.
Yes, it's actually how I learned about the work that you were doing. So I think this is a super useful way to be able to stay
Learn
connected.
about your wonderful work.
I wanted to open it up. Any other final questions before we get final comments and then wrap? Yes.
I have one final one, not to, much. So, one thing that is my pet peeve, that since I'm here that I should say, if you're in healthcare, please, I notice a trend of people in healthcare, whether nurses or doctors or anyone, like creating TikToks and like having content about their work. The problem is a good majority of these TikToks are extremely the content is really kind of predicated on talking about the client and making fun of the client, especially if they have mental health issues. So just please be aware. I just think about this all the time. Like if I did this as a lawyer, like no, my clients would not trust me anymore. I don't even know how people are able to get away with this, but I honestly think it's not going to last too long. People are going to get written up. You're not going to, so please just think about that. If you're trying to be like, oh, let me do let me create a TikTok, let me go on social media. Ask yourself if your content is predicated on talking poorly or being condescending about the plight of your clients. Because I literally see these every day, like, and they have tons of followers, and it is largely because they are talking, they are kind of making content about, how their client who has dementia, who forgot where she was, and then ha ha ha, it's so funny. It's not funny. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you
Yeah,
for that reminder. Yeah, go ahead, Nancy.
absolutely. And if I could just add that I cannot stress enough the cultural competency aspect. So even just the things that we're talking about today, whether someone has an upcoming court case or a court case of their loved one that's creating a lot of stress, or whether they have roaches or rats or bed bugs, how are you asking these questions? How do you engage with your patients? How are you building rapport? What are your bedside manners? Because if you're dismissive, if I already get an air that you're arrogant, you think you're better than me, you're looking down upon me, I'm not going to answer those questions honestly. I'm not going to tell you anything because you're just going to judge me, right? I don't feel safe in this space. So yes, everything we're saying is true. And yes, medical professionals, y'all have a huge part to play, but please get training, talk to the right folks before you just start asking folks if they have a criminal case or bed bugs and roaches. But please do see this as a collective intersectional issue where medical care is really like at the forefront because we all need to be alive, right? And like, you have a very important job. If you did not know this, you do. And so wear that with a badge of honor. You don't have to be radical. You don't have to be a prison industrial complex abolitionist. All you need to do is care for human beings, which I hope is why you're in this work, and see the dignity and humanity in everyone. And like Stella said, I implore everyone to tap into what we have coined, what we call your radical imagination. In this movement lawyering space that we're in, we talk about radical imagination. We do not have a dearth of imagination or ideas. We just have a dearth of people using it for the right things. If we can figure out how to blow up as many little babies and children as we can in whatever country we want to bomb with technology and science leading, we can figure out a way to address people's medical needs, to feed people, to house people, and to treat people with dignity and respect. So thank you very much.
I have nothing else to add after that because what else can be said? Thank you so much, Nancy. Thank you so much, Leah. We did mention and drop some sources in the chat as well for the residents who are on thinking about what medical legal kind of partnerships and resources exist within Monty. And so there's the New York Legal Assistance Program, there is the Bronx Defenders, there's Terra Firma, all kind of specific for different issues. And your colleagues in leadership would be able to tell you a lot more about that. But just to say that what you're seeing is at a high level that we can bring down and really make very explicit for the Bronx community as well.
Stella, I'm so sorry. I hate to do this, but I would be remiss if I'm in a room of doctors and I did not shout out. We have a partnership with D-Live. They are hospital-based intervention crew. So we have Dr. Tolu Shinui runs Detroit Life is Valuable Every Day. He is an ER doctor, and we have a holistic partnership with this ER doctor so that when young people and whoever come into his ER with a gunshot wound, they're going into the program and getting wraparound services. They're coming to us for their legal services. So for any ER doctors here, and if y'all don't already have hospital-based intervention crew, work with a nonprofit, start one up. There should be hospital-based interventions everywhere. So I got to plug Dr. Tolu and our D-Live crew that we have here in Detroit.
That's excellent, because I think it really is a reminder of what exists and what could exist as you remind us to really dream radically. I want to thank our speakers. Thank you, Leah. Thank you, Nancy, for just offering for us both your lived experience, your expertise, and a call to action to really think about what we can do to make these social determinants of health better for our patients. For those who are on, thank you for being on. We have shared our link for follow-up feedback if you have any, and we will have our next rounds. December is a month of rest, so we'll have our next rounds in January, the end of January. And until then, keep fighting the good fight. And thank you all so very much.
Thank you, guys. Bye.